I'm certain it would depress me when I see what goes on all over the world. Now, it may or may not surprise you to know or to find out that those are not those quotes, or the product in question was not the internet. It's not Facebook. It's not any form of social media. It's not any even satellite television, not even cable television. This was a survey given by the BBC, the British Broadcasting Company, in 1948 about television. People were afraid of it. What's it going to do to my family? It's going to be a terrible influence. It's going to corrupt our country. It's going to corrupt our communities. Why, there may be some truth to that. But my point is, we tend to have that same fear about social media today. I don't want to mess with it. I don't want to get on it. It's all bad stuff. Everything on there is foul. Everything on there is vulgar. Everything on there is depressing. I don't want to be involved with social media. Well, this Saturday from 9 to 11, Saturday morning, we're going to have a social media workshop where we're going to talk about how we can use social media, not to share pictures of your grandkids or your lunch or your new shoes, or what you do that, fine, go ahead. But what we want to talk about is how can we use social media to impact the Lord's kingdom. If you're a social media user already, but you're not sure on how to share, you're not sure on how to go about using different tools to share your faith, this workshop will be for you. If you don't know anything about social media, this workshop will be for you. This is not going to be, again, this isn't going to be a how-to about, how to get involved with Facebook so you can do all that other stuff. That'll be up to you. But what we want to talk about is specifically how can we advance God's kingdom. Even more specifically, how can we use our Come and See program through social media? How can we share it? How can we promote it in a way that can benefit not only our congregation, but the kingdom as a whole? If you were to combine the users of Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, you'd have the third largest country in the world. We're told to go into all the world. That's where they are. And you don't have to go anywhere. You can sit in your jammies at home, and you can share the gospel by going into all the world through the use of social media. So let me encourage you, whether you're a novice at social media, whether you don't care at all, let me encourage you to care some and just come and find out how you can be useful, how you can be an impact by doing something as simple as clicking around on your computer and impact the world, impact the kingdom in a positive way. Saturday morning from 9 to 11, we'll meet in the remote service area, and I believe it'll be beneficial for you.
Thanks, Clint. Listen, evangelism using Come and See and World Bible School, I'm telling you, it does not get any easier than this when it comes to winning souls. I mean, it just does not get any easier. And so I would really encourage you to really consider and think about your part and how you might be able to play a role in that effort that could have a huge impact on our community that is around us. Last week, I spoke to you a little bit about being able to absorb truth, and I liken a person who does not absorb truth to a cheap roll of paper napkins that it looks on the outside as though it's really going to absorb a lot of moisture, but in reality it doesn't. In fact, oftentimes it just does the opposite of that. We want to be people who are able to absorb truth, that we don't want to become like a Teflon pan where the truth, slides around in our brains and goes in one ear and out the other. We want it to be something that would stick with us. And so we looked at Ezra, the 7th chapter and verse 10. Stephen, I want to share with you another aspect of our character that I think goes a long ways in terms of how people view us and how they view the church and even how they view God. A number of years ago, Charles Swindoll, he wrote a book that was an interesting book. And in this book, it was called Getting a Grip. But in this book, he shared a story about a man who was living in Long Beach, and he went to a fried chicken franchise in order to buy some chicken. He went along, and as he pulled up, he got out. His girlfriend stayed in the car. He went inside, and he ordered a box of chicken. And so the manager, he brings out the box of chicken, and he gives it to him, but he inadvertently made a mistake, Because what he had done that day is that he had taken all the proceeds of that day that store had earned, and he put all that money inside a fried chicken box. He was going to camouflage it because he was going to make a deposit with it later on, and he handed this to this man. The man takes his chicken box that he thinks is full of chicken, but is full of money, and he leaves and gets in the car with his girlfriend, and they drive down to the park, and they get ready to have lunch and so forth, or dinner or whatever it was, and they get ready to eat, and he opens it up, and there's this bunch of money that is there. At that moment, this guy is faced with a huge decision. And a lot is going to be said about his integrity. What is he going to do? What is the moral thing to do? What is the ethical thing to do? What is the right thing to do? Well, the man said to his girlfriend, he goes, well, we can't take this money. And so he boxed the money up into the chicken box. He takes it back, and he gives it to the proprietor, to the manager. The manager was shocked. He could not believe that this guy had all this money and that he had the integrity to bring it back. And so he said to me, he goes, this is great. And the guys go, thanks, it was the right thing to do. I tried to do the right kind of thing. And then he gets ready to leave, and the manager says, no, wait, listen, stay around. Listen, he goes, I want to call the news. I want them to come down, and I want them to interview you and take a picture of you because you have the most integrity of anyone in this city. And the man says to me, he says, please, I don't want to do that. He says, well, why wouldn't you want to do that? He goes, look, I'm married, and the girl out in that car is not my wife. Wow. I mean, think about that. In one moment, he's a shining light in terms of money. In the next, he is darkness. In one moment, we're people who go to church and we claim to be Christians and all that thing. And in the next moment, when we're called to stand up for that which is moral and ethically right and make the right kind of choices, sometimes we don't. If someone were to, decide that they want to write a story about our lives, would we be comfortable in them writing everything that they know, putting it down on paper? Most of us probably would blush a little bit at the possibility of that thing happening to us. So this evening I want to talk to you a little bit about holding fast to our integrity. I think for the most part, our integrity is intact, but there's times when we maybe don't do so well with it. So what is integrity? Well, the dictionary defines integrity as a firm adherence to a code of especially moral or ethical values, incorruptibility, an unimpaired condition, soundness, the quality or state of being complete or undivided completeness. I think probably the one that's strongest is that who adheres to a strong moral and ethical sense of value, a completeness, if you will. In the Old Testament, of course, it was not written in Koine Greek, but is written in Hebrew, and there is a word that is closely aligned to integrity, which means completeness. And when the writer of Psalms tried to write about this young shepherd that was called out of the sheepfold and into becoming the king of Israel, he wrote these about David over in Psalm 78 and verse 72. So he shepherded them according to the integrity of his heart and guided them with his skillful hands. If you take the idea of completeness or soundness, then that would say to us that in the life of David, there were no hairline fractures that were there. There was no sense of a loss of integrity. If David said he was going to do it, then he would do it. If he made a promise, he kept it. If he began a job, he finished it. With David as a leader, the nation really did feel secure. Now, I know what you're thinking because right away you're going all the way back to Bathsheba and so forth, right? I mean, that's where I went when I first got going along these lines. But when a person has integrity, it does not mean that there is perfection, that there is no sin whatsoever. A person with integrity means that they're not hypocritical. It means they are light. What they are in light, that's what they're like in the darkness. They aren't manipulative. They're not people who have a lot of self-aggrandizing about themselves because they don't have anything to hide. What you see is really what you get for the most part. And so integrity has to do with, to tell the truth, even when the truth may harm us or it may make us uncomfortable or cost us everything. It's finding the courage to follow a true path while others are cutting corners and so forth. That's what integrity is about. So when you think about the word integrity and you think about various characters in the Bible, who are some of those that come to your mind? Well, rhetorically, and of course that was a question, but we might say, well, okay, when you think about integrity, right away, Joseph comes to your mind. I know it would come right away to Dan Alligood because, like, Joseph is way at the top on his list of great guys in the Bible. But there's another one who was first tested when he found himself in a lion's den, and that, of course, is Daniel. Daniel is an interesting character, so let me ask you to open your Bibles over to Daniel, the 6th chapter. Daniel chapter 6. As you turn there, I think there are some principles that we can find in this section that stand strong even to this day. Daniel was a Jew who was brought in exile to Babylon by the armies of Nebuchadnezzar. When he comes, he's a young man. Even as a young man, he shows a strong sense of integrity in terms of what he's going to eat and what he's going to drink and so forth. Well, he's living in the city of Babylon. Once there was Nebuchadnezzar as king, and now they had been conquered by the Medes and the Persian, and now the king that is on the throne is Darius. He recognizes he's reorganizing. He's looking at his government, and as he looks at the government and the realm, he immediately notices the character of Daniel. There's something about him that stands out above those who are around him. By this time, Daniel is no longer a young man. He came as just a youth to Babylon, but now he's like 80 years old. And Darius sees something special about Daniel. We take up the story in Daniel, the 6th chapter, verse 1 through 3. It seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they should be in charge of the whole kingdom, and over them 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. Then this Daniel began to distinguish himself among the commissioners and satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. And so the record here says something great about Daniel. What it says about Daniel is that, listen, he's one of the 3 most powerful men in the kingdom. And Darius is setting him up almost to be like a prime minister, second only to himself, much like Joseph was made second only to Pharaoh. Well, in positions like that, you don't always gain a lot of favor. You would think a person in that kind of a position with that kind of power, you would think that he is going to be extremely prosperous and that he'd be very popular and so forth, but such was not the case. Paradoxically, it's almost the opposite of that. When a person finds himself in having to deal with their integrity, there are usually several areas that are going to challenge our integrity. One will be adversity, the other will be prosperity. If you were to think about it without raising your hand, which one do you think would be the most difficult to retain your integrity? Well, if you were to talk about adversity in life, there are times when we can get into such a position in life where our integrity is going to be challenged. If it's adversity where we are, say, lacking funds, or maybe we are struggling economically and so forth, there's going to be that test that says, listen, are you going to do the right thing? Or will you find yourself maybe wanting to fudge a little bit on the taxes? Or maybe are you going to cheat? Will you be maybe challenged to lie some? Or maybe to take that which is not yours? Maybe to cheat? Maybe to steal? What would you do if you found yourself in a place of adversity? Would that kind of thing relieve you of maybe you're about maybe morally compromising or being enticed to do that which is wrong? Or how about prosperity? I would submit to you that maybe that might be the greater test. Well, why would that be the greater test? Well, when you talk about adversity, adversity is really broken down to 3 elements, and the 3 elements is it simplifies life. You're going to be worried about the basics: food, clothing, and shelter, right? But if you're a person of prosperity where you have a lot, well, I mean, you're not going to be worried about those 3 things. You're going to be worried or thinking about other kinds of things. If you get a huge pay scale uplift, you get a huge raise or something of that nature, then when that happens, then maybe life looks a little bit different. You look at it in terms of, when it comes to being prosperous like that, you have an increase in salary, you have an increase in the perks and privacy, and with privacy comes temptation And with temptation oftentimes comes people who are jealous of the fact that you got there because they have self-ambition themselves, and they don't like it that you rose to that kind of a position. And so they'd like to bring you down a notch or drag you down, maybe because they would like to have that place that you are in. So you have a push that comes back at you when you think about climbing the top of the ladder. When you're at the top of the ladder, Solomon said over in Ecclesiastes that, I think I preached a sermon one time called The Lonely Dog at the Top. When you're at the top of the ladder, everybody is seeing you. Everyone is scrambling for the top to get up there. They just don't know how lonely it is once you're up there by yourself because you're looking down. Daniel is rising to the top very quickly. And as a result of it, his problem is not with adversity. His problem is going to be with prosperity. How is he going to handle it? How is he going to deal with those things? Well, in moments like that, only the Lord is able to preserve you. So Daniel found this to be true when he encounters the prosperity and the severity of the test that is going to come his way. Look at verse 4. Then the commissioners and the satraps began trying to find a ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to government affairs, but they found no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. They're trying to find cracks in his armor. They're trying to find cracks in his integrity, if you will, to see where he is weak. If you look up at verse 2 and so forth, there it says that he puts over 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them. In other words, he has 120 satraps that are out there who are to run the government. He puts 3 who are going to oversee the 120 satraps. Why is that? Because he says, listen, if graft is going to happen, if there's going to be cheaters among us, if there are going to be people without integrity among us, I want 3 guys that are going to oversee that. The result was that the 120 satraps got together and 2 other commissioners, and they said, listen, looks like Daniel's going to rise to the top. They probably were pilferers. They probably were thieves and cheats and liars and things of that nature, and Daniel is in the way of that, and so they got to figure out some way that they can bring him down. So they begin to sift through Daniel's life. They hope to discover some speck of dirt to use against him. So they rifle his files, they eavesdrop on his conversations, they tell him 24 hours a day. They're trying to find anything that could bring him down. Now, it doesn't say that they eavesdrop. It doesn't say that they rifle his files. It doesn't say that they follow him. That's my speculation. But it's a really possibility, isn't it? Because they're trying to find a crack in this guy's armor that could bring him down, but not one crumb of corruption could be found in their sieve. So Daniel's life is clean from his business dealings to his bank accounts, to closed-door meetings. These guys can't find anything. Did Daniel know that he has been observed? Does Daniel know that he's being investigated? Well, maybe he did, and maybe he didn't. If he didn't, it didn't matter. If he did, it doesn't matter, because this guy is a guy who's going to do what's right no matter whose eyes are upon him. What he does in the light, he does in the darkness. What he does in secret is what he does out in the broad open. That's the kind of character he is. And so it seemed that he was following the advice that Eliphaz gave to Job. Is not fear of God your confidence, and the integrity of your ways your hope? Remember when Joseph was tempted, remember he said, how can I sin against God and Potiphar? Notice who he had his priorities with. How can I sin against God? God was the one that determined his decisions and what he was going to make in his life. Daniel is that same kind of a person. He's the same kind of an individual. And so because he was obedient to God's law, Daniel proved himself blameless under man's laws, and his enemy's only resort was to go to that spot. That's where they thought he was the weakness, and that was in his religion or in his relationship with God. Since they could not find crime there, then they'd have to find it in God's law, making it a crime. Look at what it says in verse 5. Then these men said, we shall not find any ground of accusation against this Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God. And that's why I think they were following him. They were following him, and they knew his religious MO, the things that he regularly did. And one of the things that he always did was he was a prayer. In fact, it says that he had opened up his window so they faced Jerusalem, and he would drop to his knees and he would pray 3 times a day, and that's where they had him. And so these guys get together in verses 6 through 9, and they convince Darius to sign a 30-day injunction forbidding prayers to any god or man other than the king. And the penalty was the lion's den, was death, if you violate this. And so it's the law of the Medes and Persians, which could not be revoked. Even the king himself could not revoke it. Once it was set in place, once he signed it into law, then it's law. And it meant for 30 days, no one could pray to any other god. No man could pray to any other man. It was Darius alone. Part of it had to do probably with this guy's narcissism and so forth, but that's what's going on here. Daniel is an interesting person to the way he responds to it. He's at a crossroads there. What is he going to choose? What is he going to do? Look at verse 10. Now, when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now, in his roof chamber, he had windows open toward Jerusalem. And he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously. So he's praying continually 3 times a day in broad daylight, open for people to see, and he risks. So what is he risking? Well, he's risking his position. He's risking maybe a wage. He's risking his prestige. But the biggest one is he's going to risk his life. Because this law says if you pray to anyone other than Darius, you can't pray to any other god or any man. If you do so, then you're going to die. And that was the choice that he had to make. To make that choice takes integrity, and that's what Daniel does. He knows what's going on. He knows the consequences of his actions, but he knows who's bigger to him than anyone else in the world, and he knows who he is going to answer to, and he knows ultimately that there's an eternal question that is at hand here. And it's not just what's happening here on earth, but it's what is going to go beyond this life and the trust that he has in God. So the conspirators, they waste little time. They run right away, straight away to Darius, and they say, this guy, here's what he's doing. And so they rat him out, is what they do. And Darius, his hands are tied. What is he going to do with this? He has just signed a law, the law of the Medes and the Persians, and now he has to live with it. Look at verse 13. Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction that you signed, but keeps making his petition 3 times a day. You can almost taste the venom from these guys. They've got him boxed in. They've got him, and they know it. What they didn't know is that they have truly offended Darius because Darius likes Daniel. He likes Daniel. There's a reason why he's going to make him second only to himself, because he's trustworthy. And these guys have not only boxed Daniel in, they've boxed Darius in, which makes it even worse because now they've boxed themselves in. Because, as the old saying, they have cut their nose off in spite of their face. They just don't know it yet. So Darius is stuck. He has to do something. Well, it says in verse 16, I call it 16a, then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. This is where a life of integrity and blameless living takes us to the lion's den. Sometimes we too have to make choices. Sometimes they have to do with morality. Sometimes it has to do with integrity. Sometimes it has to do with your core values of your life, where you have to choose, am I going to do the right thing or the wrong thing? Am I going to reach towards self-preservation, or am I possibly going to risk it all and go for it? This is what Daniel does. Well, I guess what I'm saying to you is that if you decide to do the right thing, it isn't always going to work out for you super great. You might choose to do the right thing, and you might lose your job. You might choose the moral thing, and you might lose your friends. You hear what I'm saying? Just because you choose the right thing doesn't mean it's always going to be rosy because of it. But here's who it's rosy with, and that's with God. And you're able to live with yourself, and you're able to look at yourself in the mirror and say, there stands a just man or a just woman, because I stood with my integrity, and my integrity is intact. I made the right kind of decision. Well, at that point, Darius expresses to Daniel, he says, we just have one hope. 16, verse 16 says, your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you. Now look at verse 23 and 22 and 23. God did deliver Daniel by sending his angel to clamp shut the mouths of the ravenous lions. No harm came to him because he had trusted his God. So very quickly, let me share with you two principles, okay? It's very simple, actually. Long before you get to that point of making a decision, you have to make a determination that you're going to stand upright. When that happens, true integrity will imply that you do what is right when no one else is looking, or when everyone else is compromising. That means this. What do you do for a living? Well, what you may do for a living, you might be a person who, is a bookkeeper. Or you might be a person who sells cars. Or you might be a person who sells real estate. Or you might be a person who is an executive in a large company or corporation. Or it might be that you're a person who repairs cars. You might be a person who's an IT guy, works in computers and so forth. Those are all areas that we find ourselves when we have jobs. What do you do when you're faced with a choice where you have to stand for what is right, what is morally right, and what is ethically right? Where will your integrity stand in those moments? And so what you do, your integrity implies that you'll do what is right when no one else sees you doing it, because it's the right thing to do. Every occupation requires integrity. Every occupation. It'd be so easy to take a shortcut. It would be so easy to fudge, just to cheat a little bit. No one may never know about this. No one may never find out about this, but you'll always know. And that one who is constantly recording her life will know as well. Number 2. Real integrity stays in place whether the test is adversity or prosperity. Daniel was next in line to be second only to Darius himself. He had to make a choice. Does he risk all or does he not do? Could not Daniel, think about this for just a moment with me, could not Daniel just as easily continue to pray 3 times a day, only this time he goes up to his room and he closes the windows? He could have done that, right? Most of us would say, that's not a bad thing to do. There's nothing wrong with that. But Daniel is a different kind of guy. Daniel is a guy who wants people to know the reason why I'm extraordinary, the reason why I'm different is because I serve someone greater than myself. And I serve someone greater than the king. And so he makes that kind of a choice. And so whether it's you're in adversity or whether it's in prosperity, the encouragement is that we take the high road and that we stand intact with our integrity. Daniel, fortunately, he stood for that which is right, and God saved him. Even Darius saw that. Darius said, your God will save you. And his God saved him. Now, if we make the right choices, and maybe we go through even more adversity because of that, we will be saved. We may not be saved from the consequence of our choice, but we'll be saved in the end when it counts the very most. So let me encourage you, number one, be people who absorb the truth and hold to it. And number two, hold fast to your integrity. It's yours and no one else's. Hold fast. And do so, together we stand and sing, and you respond if you need to do so at this time.
In the field I would wield